Today, I got an email. It was a simple email. All it asked me is, what is war? Well, Amy279209@gmail.com, I'm glad you asked. Let me explain. You see, when two nations hate each other very much, sometimes they shoot each other. And sometimes these nations are made up of octopuses, octopi, octopodes, whatever. And these octopus, plural, sometimes they throw dirt at each other. Today in this video, we are honoring the memory of one of the brave veterans of the war over Octopolis. Octopolis may look like a nondescript patch of the ocean floor off the coast of Australia, and that's because it is. But over this little patch of sand, just a few square meters, lays thousands upon thousands of scallop shells. Inexplicably, the typically solitary octopus is drawn to this little patch of sea in droves. Over half a dozen octopuses can be spotted here at any given time. And so the problem with Octopolis is obvious. There are more octopuses than there is space. On the shelly ground of Octopolis, like generations of vertebrates and invertebrates alike, the octopolins pass their time participating in the 3 Fs: fighting, flinging stuff at each other, and mating. For years now, Octopolis has been in turmoil as its citizens do whatever it takes to eke out space. Octopuses can be spotted boxing and slapping each other silly, but fascinatingly, they also use projectiles. Neptune created all octopuses, but Samuel Colt made them all equal. Okay, they don't have like revolvers. They just like throw the stray scallop shells at each other. Oh, sorry, should I continue whispering? They just throw the stray scallop shells at each other, and they use the jets of water from their siphons to aim and propel the shells. Maybe chucking stuff around isn't as impressive as octopuses with swords, but what these cephalopods have done shouldn't be minimized. Throwing stuff around is actually an incredibly rare behavior in the animal kingdom. It's spotted in primates, of course. We're famous for flinging poop around and flinging plague-ridden bodies over walls during sieges. Elephants also sometimes throw dung. But other than that, it's pretty rare, especially among invertebrates. And shells aren't the only projectiles. Some Octopolis mollusks have been spotted picking up armfuls of dirt and debris and then flinging this at their neighbors with a gust from their siphon, like a sandstorm. To clarify, an octopus's siphon is a pump on the underside of their body that shoots water. It's kind of like a bidet. Siphons work to disperse ink clouds, and they act like jetpacks, propelling our cephalopod friends through the water. They also work like leaf blowers, and can be used to clear a den of debris, the same way you spritz a cat with water when he lunges for a houseplant. A well-aimed squirt from a siphon can thwart enemies. Some argue that the dust-blowing behavior in Octopolis might not be aggressive at all, or even necessarily intentional. This kind of destroys the epic war narrative this video impinges on, but it's better not to over-anthropomorphize animals. Other possibilities include that these octopuses could just be cleaning up what they perceive to be their den, and just so happen to hit their neighbors in the crossfire. I know that I often end up clipping my neighbors when I throw my recycling out my window. But octopuses are smart, incredibly smart for invertebrates. In labs, they've been trained to recognize patterns, and they can solve mazes. They're basically smart enough to solve the puzzles on an Applebee's kids menu. One way we can guesstimate the neural complexity of an animal is the sheer number of neurons they have. For reference, a California sea slug, a fairly unremarkable mollusk, has around 18,000 neurons. The social honeybee has around 1 million, and Syrian hamsters have around 100 million. The common octopus, or Octopus vulgaris, which is the critter being referenced for this sculpture, has 500 million neurons. That's almost as many as some monkeys have. Of course, this is a rough rule of thumb, since the bigger an animal is, the more neurons it has, just because there's more body to control and receive signals from, but you get the idea. One thing to note is that while mammals have the bulk of their neurons in the brain, octopuses have a lot of neurons throughout their bodies. About 2/3 of all their neurons live directly in their arms. So to divert a predator, an octopus can dismember its own arm, and the arm will continue to wiggle around to distract the predator, the same way an iguana's tail can detach. Speaking of losing arms, that's how octopuses reproduce. No, they don't like bud. The males have this special arm called a hectocotyledus that carries their, shall we say, cooties. When they're ready to create the next generation, they'll rip this arm off and then chuck it at their girlfriend, and then they die. So hopefully they don't miss. Don't worry, the females aren't much better off, because after they lay their eggs and make sure not all of their hatchlings get eaten, they also die. This means that some octopuses can have lifespans as little as 6 months, although most live somewhere between 1 and 2 years. There are a few species that don't immediately die after mating and laying eggs, but they still only live for about 5 years. Given that their lifespans are so short, it's kind of remarkable that they're as smart as they are, especially since they aren't taught anything by their parents either. The most their mom does is make sure a fish doesn't come around and gobble them up. Some moms out there will go the extra mile and cover their eggs with ink. This might be either for camo, or the dark ink draws in heat to help insulate them. Ink is really cool. It isn't exclusive to the octopus, of course, and I'll mention some other cephalopods who have it, like squids, nautiluses, big pens, and cuttlefish. The darkness of this ink comes from melanin, but the exact color of it varies from species to species. The octopus produces a jet black ink, while squids produce a sort of blue-black, and cuttlefish produce a reddish-brown ink. Cephalopod ink was actually used as, well, ink for quills and pens back in the day. Reddish-brown cuttlefish ink was especially prevalent up until the 19th century, but it was initially popularized by the Greeks and Romans. The word sepia that describes that distinctive reddish-brown ink actually comes from the ancient Greek word for cuttlefish. Also famous for their ink is the glow squid. Unlike iron golems and ocelots, there are actually glow squid adjacent creatures in our real and round world. They're the odd bobtail squid. These little guys are bioluminescent, and they actually can combine some of their bioluminescent goo in with their ink. When surprised, these squids release their inky, glowing goo, and it acts like an organic flashbang, stunning their predator. Releasing ink is primarily used to thwart or distract predators. The simplest inkling strat is for an octopus to just release a big old cloud of ink. They can control how far or fast their ink spreads using controlled bursts from their siphons. This big ink cloud acts like a smoke screen to let an octopus dart away, and to escape as quickly as possible, they propel themselves with gusts from their siphon. Swimming like this is incredibly high energy, so it's saved for emergencies. Day to day, octopuses will just crawl on the ocean floor. However, even this lazy locomotion is still energy intensive. Even after a short crawling session, they've been observed needing to recuperate for at least 10 or 15 minutes. Understandable. The spotty bobtail squid makes ribbons out of ink that will clump together to mimic seagrass so that they can hide in. But some cephalopods take it a step further and make an entire decoy animal. Granted, since most fish aren't really known for their astounding eyesight, all these decoys have to be our blobs of ink. And yes, blob of ink is distinct from a cloud of ink. To make a blob, mucus will be mixed with ink, and this enables the blob to linger in the water for longer, and since it's a more or less octopus-sized hunk of squishy matter, predators will be fooled by these decoys. An escaping octopus will conjure a few of these decoy blobs before jetting away, and then, presumably, recuperating for like 3 hours. Another remarkable thing about octopuses is that they have no bones. Their legs or arms or tentacles are moved just with muscles. This might be kind of hard for our bony brains to conceptualize. Of course, in vertebrates, our bodies are moved by our muscles working in conjunction with our bones, but the guiding principle behind octopus arms noodling about is not so different. To move a limb, muscles still work in teams, some stiffening and some relaxing. The contracted muscle acts sort of like how our bones act in our musculoskeletal systems, but they also act, of course, just like the contracting muscle. This method of movement is called muscular hydrostats, which makes me fall asleep just by saying it. But despite the jargon, this method of movement isn't really so foreign. There's one part of our bodies that also works like this, the tongue. Or, if you happen to be a worm, your whole body moves like this. On the arms of the octopus is, of course, suction cups. Suction cups help to grab onto objects to manipulate them, and prey to kill them. They act kind of like giant and especially grippy fingerprints. But helping an octopus grab stuff isn't their only use. They also have chemoreceptors in them, or what I, as a non-Latin speaking person, like to call taste buds. Regardless, this lets octopus use their suction cups to identify their surroundings and also, just as importantly, themselves. Octopuses have pretty bad proprioception. Proprioception being the sense a critter has for where one body part is relative to another. Generally, to keep track of their noodly appendages, they simply look at them. But this is a problem, since they have 8 legs but only 2 eyeballs. If they aren't careful, their poor proprioception can lead them to getting trapped in sticky situations. Or, well, sucky situations. Pretty much they can get tangled up in their own limbs because their suction cups get stuck to other arms. However, because their suction cups have taste receptors, they can tell when what they're rubbing up against is another arm. If I was presenting this video like 10 years ago, I'd say, wouldn't it be cool if headphone wires had the same property? But now headphones don't really have wires, so that doesn't really land. Speaking of chemoreception, some think there are chemicals in octopus ink that actually disrupt chemoreception. Not in humans, otherwise we wouldn't have octopus ink in noodles, but specifically against their predators. Not that we aren't their predators, but like they're predators out in the ocean with them, like moray eels. There's some multisyllabic chemical compound or other that muffles or numbs or somehow otherwise disrupts the smell of fish, sort of like a weak pepper spray. Also, speaking of ink and smell and taste, there's some evidence that their ink acts like a warning bell to other octopus in the area. It's like if you smell that your roommate peed their pants, you know something scary is about to happen. But let's go back to talking about the tools octopuses use that aren't just parts of their body. While tool use isn't unheard of in the animal kingdom, it's pretty rare to see in invertebrates, on account of them being, on average, pretty stupid. Some octopuses have been spotted acting like hermit crabs. These guys have found a way to use discarded halves of coconut shells, and they can often be spotted carrying them around. And when a threat approaches, they'll quickly bunker down under their coconut shell. The reason this is considered tool use while hermit crab shells aren't is because octopuses don't use coconut shields at all times. They don't wear them around like little hats. In fact, carrying around coconuts actually impedes their movement and it leaves their noggin exposed, which makes them more vulnerable to predation than usual. Since they only use their coconut shield at certain times, we can infer that these octopus pick them up with foresight. But one of the best tools octopuses have at their disposal is friendship. Octopuses have been spotted romping around coral reefs with an entourage of various species of fish around them, and together they're going hunting. While bottom feeders scour the bottom of the ocean floor, fish-like groupers peek into crevices, and when a fish finds something hard to reach, they'll signal to an octopus to come and fish it out for them. However, sometimes unsavory fish will intrude on these parties, and sometimes friendly fish will step out of line. When this happens, the octopus will take the role of diplomat and step in and punch the offending fish, like literally just decks them in the face. Punching a fish serves a couple of purposes. It can thwart opportunistic predators from joining future hunting expeditions, and it can make sure that friendly fish don't misbehave in the future. It's thought that octopuses have enough foresight to know that keeping their fish friends or foes in check will benefit the hunting party in the future. It's kind of like game theory. Not that I understand game theory, that's just how the scientists who wrote this paper described the behaviors. So yeah, cool. Well, what can I say? War, friendship, coconut shells. It's incredible what these creatures can do. So in total, this whole sculpting and painting process took me like 16 hours, and that was probably 10% or so longer than it would have taken me if I wasn't fiddling with the camera and like making sure everything was in shot and in focus, etc, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's not the longest I've ever spent on a sculpture, but that's definitely not an insignificant amount of time either. Yeah, I don't usually see art videos do this sort of like intensive, nitpicky breakdown, but I saw a group of Estonian Minecrafters do this and like not only time their whole build, but also how long each step took, and I thought that was interesting. So I just took it. Yeah, so octopus. Here he is. So blue. Are they usually blue? No, but the pursuit for photorealism is cringe. So that's all I have to say on that. Therefore, I painted it blue. Okay, bye. Just wanted to stop in to say that if you don't like, then the octopus is going to get eaten by this kitten, and if you don't subscribe, then the octopus is just going to have to eat this little kitten, so I think you know what the right thing to do is.